It includes online courses, which also especially includes the recently launched Let's Talk Vaccines online course. We also have guidebooks, glossaries, tip sheets, podcasts, and we have thematic monthly webinars. So right now, I'd like also to mention something about this webinar. It's going to be live stream on Facebook. We are going to put the recording on the YouTube, Internews YouTube channel and the playlist under Health Journalism Network. We also want to remind you that we have live captioning for this particular webinar in this series of webinar on disability reporting, and the link is being shared in the chat. So thank you again for joining us. Without further ado, Pat, over to you. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I thought I was unmuted. Thank you, Bea. Welcome everyone, and thank you for your interest in this important topic. Today's webinar is going to focus on terminology. The words we use when we talk about disability can affect how people think about disabled persons, as well as how disabled persons perceive themselves. Disability terminology has changed over time to reflect a better understanding of people's capabilities and to address the ways in which language can stigmatize people. Jackie Lidubwi, Internews Project Manager for Inclusive Media Project in Sub-Saharan Africa, and a multi-award-winning Kenyan television producer, will cover the do's and don'ts of disability terminology and the reasons behind it to guide journalists in using appropriate terms when reporting on disability issues. We also have a speaker who will discuss disability terminology and advocacy in Yemen. Daris Al Baadani is a senior journalist and a trainer leading radio programs on peace and reconciliation at Radio Yemen Times and Sanaa, Yemen. He is also the director of the Media Center for Persons with Disabilities in Yemen and a member of Internews Health Journalism Network. He founded the Media Center in 2020 to address the marginalization and lack of inclusion of people with disabilities in Yemen society. Mr. Baadani, who is blind himself, most recently has focused on providing information about COVID-19 in accessible formats to people with disabilities. And our third speaker is Dr. John Endabula, who will speak on leveraging social media and disability reporting. Dr. Endabula is currently a lecturer at Murang'a University of Technology in Kenya. He holds a PhD in mass communications from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He has a recent book publication is Social Media and Political Campaigns in Kenya, an examination of the influence of digital networking technologies on election processes. He is also the editor of the African Multidisciplinary Journal of Research and Kikwetu, a journal of East African literature. And now I'll turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Pat, for the beautiful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us from. I'm Jackie Lidubwi, and I'm going to take us through language and terminologies in disability reporting. Next slide, Chris. Next slide on language and terminology. So language is very important when we are talking about disability reporting and also about persons with disabilities. For a long time, persons with disabilities have been marginalized and discriminated because of the language that they used. So I can talk about the hand cup, which is the most commonly terminology that is used by people to describe persons with disability. So that term was coined after the Second World War because so many people got injured and they got disability. So those who got disability, they used to remove their caps and then put in the hand, and then they lined on the street so that people can give them money or they can give them some help. So that is how the word handicap was coined in France. It is a French word, handicapé, to mean disability. So you see, a word like that is discriminating, but that was then. It was then because disability, by that time, the persons with disability were viewed as people who are helpless, object of pity, and people who cannot amount to anything. But the narrative right now has changed. Persons with disability have gone to school, they're educated, they're distinguished members of our society, they can be providers, and also they are caregivers to their families. So that's why it is important for us to dig those stereotypical, those negative language, and have new terminologies. So that's the most important reason why we need to change the disability narrative, to remove the older language and terminology so that we can have the new one. So disability, the language that we use will show if we expect someone who has a disability. If you say disabled, it means something that cannot be able to perform something very well. So disabled is something that is disorganized. Even a chair can be disabled. So if you use that language to describe someone with disability, it means that person is not able. And that will lead to marginalization. Even in job opportunities, we'll say this person who is disabled is not able and cannot be able to do work. That's why we are really advocating to use more inclusive and the human rights terminologies, which we are going to use to see in a few. So language is a powerful tool you can use to show respect, and even you can use to practice discrimination. Just the way I've said, if you see someone is disabled and that's the only thing you see, you will not even give them work because you think they are delicate, they are special, and they cannot be able to perform anything. Also, it can use to devalue people. When you see someone, you don't see that person can be able to do something, but the disability is the only thing you are seeing. So people with disability need to be respected, and hence we need to use respectful language to make them be part of the society. Next slide. So what's the power of language? So language is so powerful because it creates a stigma-free society. If we live in a society where everyone feels appreciated by the way we call them, by the way we name them, we are going to have a stigma-free society. And also it helps to end outdated cultural practices and practices in disability and on disability. So some languages, the way I explained in the last webinar, like albino, that term in Kiswahili in Africa, in most African countries which speak Kiswahili, albino means an evil spirit. So if it is an evil spirit, it's something that you just see like albino is an evil spirit, and that's why there are still cases of persons with albinism being hunted even right now in Africa because they believe they are evil spirit or they contain some magic. So if we use the language that is very encompassing, then we are going to end outdated cultural practices. Then with the good language, we are going to have a very inclusive society where persons with disabilities and those without disabilities are included, and then everyone will be going to share equal opportunities in our society. Next slide. So some of the rules that we need to know when we are addressing person with disability. The first one, call a person by his or her name. Everyone has a name. There's no single person who doesn't have a name. But you will ask me, maybe I don't know their name. How will I call them? My answer will be, how will you address someone you don't know their name? You'll say, hi, bro. Hi, I'm Jackie. And then I say, I'm Jackie, what's your name? So the same thing, when you see a person with disability, just say, hi, bro, hi, sis. They are going to respond, and then you can start your conversation. But don't just see and then you say, you disabled person, come here or something. Don't see the disability, see the person first, and that person has a name. And then the second one, use people first language. This is what we are really advocating for, especially the disability advocates, the human rights, the National Convention on Human Rights and Disability. That is what they're advocating for. Because when you just say disabled, an animal can be disabled, and even we have plants that are disabled. We even have plants that have albinism, and even animals that have albinism. So the people first language help us to understand that you are talking to a person, not an animal or a plant. So that's why it is important for us to say a person with disability, or we use the people first language. Also, ask how a person would like to be referred. After we've said people first language, but another one is ask a person how they would like to be referred, because maybe some people will not mind if you call them disabled. But even if they don't mind, remember the understanding of disability in so many countries, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, the rate of persons with disability who are not educated is like 48%. So they cannot read or write. So if they are called disabled, they just think, oh, it's okay. But because they don't have knowledge. So even when we teach about rules to address persons with disability, we say, talk to journalists and also empower persons with disability. So it is not one way, so that they need to appreciate why we need to use this language that is very empowering, and not that the language that is diminishing to them. And then also the politics of language, that's why I'm saying ask a person first. In the West, they don't really have a big problem being referred to as the disabled, unlike in Africa. And in Africa, it's because of the many languages we speak and how we describe disability in our language. So it is more disabling. So we advocate for a person first language when you are reporting on disability issues. And then another one, address the person with disability and not their guide. When you are talking to someone who is deaf, look at that person in the eye, ask them their name, ask them what they are doing, how they are doing, but don't look at their interpreter and then start asking them, oh, what is his name? Can he be able to understand what we are talking? No, just look at the person with disability in the eye and talk to them. Next, please. So to help us illustrate the importance of language and why we need to refer to disability in a story, I have 2 scenarios. So the first scenario, you are a journalist, you've gone to cover a story where residents are complaining about noisy airplanes flying over their houses. In that neighborhood, there are 2 people who have wheelchairs. So in your report, do you think you need to mention the people who are using the wheelchair, or you just say the story? So that is something to ponder about. But for me, what I would advise, a person using a wheelchair does not add any value to that story. You will not be adding any value in saying the residents plus 2 people who uses wheelchair. Because the person who uses wheelchair, they can hear, they can see, they have a brain. So noise is something, having a disability or using a wheelchair, it does not prevent them from being like like their neighbors. So mentioning them in that story is not very important. So the second scenario is about James. It's the real story. I just interchanged the names, but it is a real story. So James is a high school teacher in Liberia. He is the only biology teacher in the school and teaching all the classes in that school. So his subjects post very impressive performance in national exams. He has 2 wives and he has 7 children. And he's the breadwinner for all his relatives and his family. And James has a disability. So I would also ask, is there a need for you to mention that James has a disability? So my answer for this one is yes, it is important. It is important because here we are portraying James as someone who is contributing to the economic growth of his country. Because he's working, he's paying tax. It is important because James is a teacher, he's teaching students and they are passing. It is also important because James is a caregiver, he's taking care of his family and even his relative. So this portrayal, we are portraying person with disability in very positive manner. And if you have such stories of person with disability in the media, then we are going to have a very inclusive media, because the way we are portraying a person with disability is in a very positive manner. It shows disability is not inability. Next slide. So I looked at several terminologies in disability reporting, and I used the guidelines by the National Center for Disabilities by the University of Arizona. And also my practice is, as a journalist for almost 18 years, I've been in the field and I've encountered some of these terminologies. So I think these terminologies can be good for us to look at it. So it's from my own experience, but also from NCDJ, and I will share the link for all the terminologies so that we can go through them. And also one thing before we talk about terminologies, remember the golden rules. Refer to a disability if it is important. But if that disability is not important in your story, there's no need for you to refer to it. The second one, ask the person with disability how they want to be named. So don't just assume this is the right word, let me use that rule. And then if you don't know that disability, you can describe instead of using the outdated language. So those are the golden rules. As we go through them, remember, person first, refer to disability if it is necessary, and then ask how they would want to be addressed. So the first one, how do we call persons without disability? Persons without disability, we call them persons without disability. Don't call them non-disabled or normal. If you call them normal, it means persons with disabilities are abnormal. So call them person without disability. Then afflicted with, stricken with, suffers from, victim. These ones are outdated narratives that we don't really want to see in the media, because this is the medical model. It means you think disability is something so sad. It means someone who has disability or just pity stories. So we say just refer to the disability, has muscular dystrophy, or this person has cerebral palsy, but don't go start stories with saying afflicted, stricken. This is medical model, which means that persons with disability are not normal and they need to be fixed. And then another one, albino, albinism, say person with albinism. Use always the people first terminology. An albino or albinism is derogatory. Then autistic, use a person with autism. Then there is blind, partially blind, and visually impaired. For blind, if someone is 100% blind, they are legally blind. So you can use blind, it is okay. Next slide. So, and also other commonly used terms to refer to people who have seeing disabilities, limited vision. And then we have low vision and also partially sighted according to the level of their vision. Next slide. Also, we have cerebral palsy, someone with cerebral palsy. We have crazy, loony, mad, psycho, mute, deranged. This one we really want to do away with. Don't start calling people crazy or psychos or deranged. This is the traditional model where we thought persons with disability are crazy and they cannot amount to anything. So just say person with mental illness. Remember a person first. And then we have deaf, those who have hearing disability. So for deaf, use deaf with that. When you are referring to someone, use a capital D. But when you are referring to audiological status, you can just use a small d to refer to deaf. And then differently abled. I see this one so much. I'm also a victim. I started a first program on disability in Kenya, and I named it Able Differently. If I were to do it again, I know better, I could have named it something different. Because when you say differently abled, it means that person, you are sugarcoating the disability, you want to diminish the disability. And also it is patronizing person with disability. So just say a person with disability, that is acceptable, but not differently abled or able differently. Also we have disabled, disability. Just remember the rule is person first. Example, the writer who has a disability. Down syndrome, a person with Down syndrome. Next slide. Next slide on terminologies. Okay, so we also have dwarf, little person, midget. That one we also want to do away with. Just say someone with short stature. I also see people saying vertically challenged. That is so derogatory. So just stick to someone who with short stature. And then epilepsy, epileptic fit. Remove that one and just say someone who has epilepsy. I think you've moved ahead, Christoph. But it's okay. We can continue with this. No, go back. Back, Christoph. Okay, so yeah, so we are talking also about handicapable. That one I've already explained. It is a cup in the hand. So that was long time ago. But now we are talking about ability. Don't use that handicap. Next slide, Christoph. Christoph, next slide. But basically what I just really need to let you know is remember the golden rule. Refer to a person with disability if it is important in your story. Ask the person why, ask the person what they are comfortable being called, and then remember that person first language is a person first, then the disability. We also have special needs functions. When you talk about special needs, it confuses, because when we talk about people with special needs, we are talking about elders, children, people with disability, refugees, and LGBTQI. So there are several. So just say a person with disability, or cite the specific disability. And then we have stuttering, stammering. This is a person who stutters. Suffers from, victim, afflicted, those are language that we need to get away from, and we are talking about, just mention the disability. And then finally, wheelchair bound, wheelchair confined, just say a person who uses wheelchair. Why? Because a person who uses wheelchair, they don't sleep in the wheelchair. They even go to the table and they join other members of their family and they take food in the table. And some of them drive. They move from the wheelchair, they go to their cars and they drive. So when you say wheelchair bound, it is somehow not very encouraging, because you are just seeing that person and you're seeing the wheelchair. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide is more of brainstorming. So Paula will share a link in the chat session. So you'll just say a yes or no, and then at the end of the discussion during Q&A, we can just project and see if we were able to answer well. So like, to call people with disability, people with special needs, or marginalized, is it a yes or no? To call people without disability normal, is it a yes or no? To tell a person with visual impairment, see you later, is it good or is it bad? Or to tell a wheelchair user, rush, run, is it good or a bad statement? So I'll just will share that link in the chat session, and then maybe you can just give your short answers. It's just like 60 seconds, and then we can show the results at the end of the discussion, at the end of the hour. I think that's the end of my presentation, and thank you so much for joining and listening in. Thank you. Back to you, Pat.
Thank you, Jackie. That was great. Now we have Daris Al Baadani is going to be talking about his work in Yemen, and I think he's going to have a translator, Sahar.
Hello, I think Daris with us. Daris, تسمعني? I don't know, maybe he is out.
Remind him to unmute himself, yeah.
Yeah, I see him.
دارس ممكن تفتح الميكروفون؟ Daris, can you unmute him if it's possible?
أيوة. مرحبا.
Yes, we can hear you.
مرحبا.
تفضل يا دارس. Yes.
اوكي سحر معلش انا بتكلم بالعربي لانه العرض الانجليش مش راضي يفتح معي. I'm sorry for that and I am sorry for late The internet is very bad معلش بس بتكلم بالعربي. اوكي مرحبا بالجميع. أنا دارس البعداني. أنا صحفي يمني للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة البصرية. أنا رئيس المركز الإعلامي للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to be with you today. My name is Daris Al Baadani. I am a Yemeni blind journalist with over 10 years of experience in radio. I also volunteer with the BBC Arabic Radio, and also I'm a president of centers of persons with disabilities.
أنا متزوج طبعا وعندي ابنتين هي إيلاف وإيلين. You can see me and my daughter in the slide.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, next slide. طبعا
I'm married and I have two daughters, Ilaf and Ali.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, كمل دارس.
طبعا اليمن تمر، لا يخفى عليكم أن اليمن تمر بحرب طاحنة أثرت على كل شيء في اليمن، ومن الذين أثرت عليهم الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة البصرية، حيث حدت من وصولهم إلى أغلب الخدمات، بل إن أغلب المراكز أغلقت بفعل هذه الحرب التي راوحت عامها السادس.
Next slide, please. Let me tell you first a few words in my country, Yemen. As it seems often to be forgotten country, Yemen has been at war for the past 6 years and is considered the worst humanitarian crisis. Vulnerable people such as the disabled have been the most affected. It is estimated over 15% of the population has disability. It is likely to be more due to the conflict. Okay, كمل.
الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة كانوا من أكثر الفئات تضرراً من هذه الحرب، حيث أثر ذلك على وصولهم إلى التعليم، كما أثر على وصول هؤلاء إلى أدنى الخدمات، وتراجعت المنظمات التي كانت تمول الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، حيث كانت قبل الحرب أكثر من 300 منظمة لكنها أغلقت أغلبها بفعل الحرب.
Next slide, please. The needs of the most vulnerable haven't been accounted for in the emergency response to Yemen. The war has worsened the situation of disabled people, which was already bad before. Most of the organizations shut down. Only a few of them keep working due to the lack of funding.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Next slide. الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في اليمن كان لهم التأثير الكبير، وكانوا من الذين تأثروا من هؤلاء فئات المرأة التي كانت من أكثر الفئات تضرراً، حيث أن المرأة في اليمن هي أصلاً تعاني من تهميش وظلم اجتماعي، إضافة إلى ذلك فهي تعاني من إعاقة، لذلك الظلم مركب. إضافة إلى ذلك الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة يتم حبسهم وسجنهم في منازلهم خوفاً من العيب والعار التي تؤمن بها القبيلة أو المجتمع اليمني.
Disabilities is perceived as a burden, if not a curse. Some families have kept disabled people under virtual house arrest because of the shame associated with disability. Disabled people often stayed at home. Their homes are often not adapted to their special needs. Disabled women are even more marginalized. Only few women get an education.
المرأة المعاقة في اليمن تعاني الظلم والتهميش بشكل كبير، حيث أنها حتى حريتها هي مقيدة، والأسر اليمنية لا تعطيها حتى حق الموافقة على الزواج، بل إن عليها فقط الانتظار في البيت، وللأسف حق الرعاية فقط، لا يوجد لها أي حقوق في اليمن.
Next slide also, don't forget the slides.
If there is a disabled person at home, the caregiver, who is most of the time is a woman of the family, will be prevented to get an education or may marry out their family and look after a disabled person. She is expected to stay at home to help care for the family members with disabilities.
لهذه الأسباب كلها ولهذه المعاناة والتحديات التي يضاف إليها الكثير من التحديات المتعلقة بالتغطية الإعلامية الخاطئة لقضايا الإعاقة والتي تعتمد على الرحمة والشفقة، لكل هذه الأسباب أنشأنا المركز الإعلامي للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في العام 2019، وهو أول مؤسسة إعلامية متخصصة بمناصرة حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في اليمن.
Next slide.
To tackle this huge discrimination against disabled people and make their voices heard, we have created our media center. It is the first of its kind in Yemen, and we were able to launch our project thanks for support of Internews, who support us with a small grant and training. We want with the center to raise the voice of disabled people and advocate for their rights. The center is run by disabled people. We want to train disabled people to tell their stories.
في هذا الصدد أنشئ المركز الإعلامي للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة بمساعدة سخية بمنحة صغيرة ومنحة تدريبية أخرى من منظمة انترنيوز، التي نريد توجيه الشكر والتقدير لهذه المنظمة التي أخذت بأيدينا وساعدتنا للنهوض والانطلاق بقضايا الإعاقة، بل إنها فعلا انتشرت قضايا الإعاقة من تحت الركام. قمنا بإنتاج الكثير من الأعمال سواء المرئية والمقروءة والمسموعة، وهدفنا مناصرة حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، وهناك الكثير من القصص التي أحدثت تأثيرا كبيرا لم نكن حتى نتوقعه.
We produced media content in languages adapted to disabled people needs in Braille or sign languages. We want to change the perception of disabled people. We want to break the stereotype by changing the narrative and the discrimination language. It starts by by producing the content that make that change that we aim to see.
من القصص التي أحدثت تأثير أيضا كان لدينا قصة لعلي الوجيه، أحد الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة الحركية في اليمن. علي بعد أن أنتجنا له فيديو ضمن فيديو ضوء، أثر ذلك الفيديو على حياته وغيرها بشكل كبير، إذ أن الجيران من يسكنون في الحي تعرفوا على شخصية علي الوجيه، بل وقاموا بمساعدته وتهيئة الممرات والطرقات لعلي الوجيه، الذي يحدثنا أن القصة أحدثت تغيير كبير جدا في حياته.
For example, we have recently produced a story on a disabled person, Ali Al-Wajih, who is working hard to support his family. We published his story in social media. His life changed after we shown his story. People were able to see that there is one with disabled in the neighbor, and his neighboring start helping him to move his wheelchair to his workplace and to the mosque.
هذه أحد القصص فعلا التي نفخر بإنتاجها سحر والأعزاء جميعا، وهناك الكثير من الأعمال التي عملناها بمساعدة انترنيوز سواء المقروءة والمرئية والمسموعة. أود شكر انترنيوز مرة أخرى، وأود الاعتذار منكم أيضا على تأخيري لسوء الإنترنت في اليمن. الاعتذار من الجميع، وإذا كان هناك أي أسئلة نحن جاهزون لاستقبالها.
This is just a story of many stories and success stories that we produced in the center, and hopefully with the support of Internews. And I'm sorry because of the internet issues that I run with. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Daris. And thank you, Sahar.
You're welcome.
Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Daris. That was excellent. So now our next speaker is Dr. Endabula, who will speak on leveraging social media and disability reporting. And over to you.
Thank you, Pat, for the introduction. and I'm so happy to be here to speak about leveraging social media in disability reporting. Perhaps if my slides can come up, I'd appreciate. I've been a lecturer in journalism for a couple of years now in several universities in Kenya, and I can assure you that our the curriculums I've come across, none of them deals with disability reporting, even just as special topics in reporting. So there's that gap in specialized reporting, especially for disability. And I'm excited that Internews has this program where we are training journalists and upcoming journalists on how they can approach this. And one of the places where they can take their stories to is on social media. Next slide, please. So I want to begin by talking about these post that I picked from Facebook, and this is about a politician in my home area who has 10,000 followers on Facebook, and he keeps on posting conversations, daily conversations, and he has a large audience. Now, he wrote this post about an accident he had recently. So he was driving, then had an accident, but he's safe. He managed to stop his car after one of the tires came out and rolled into the river. But what drew my attention is the third paragraph, and I'll read briefly. I knew I had lost the tire. It was in the river. How was I going to get it? Now, next to the river was a certain madman. When he saw the tire, he jumped in and removed it, brought it to me, and insulted me. Did crazy things while writing certain stuff on the ground. I let him do his thing, and when he was tired, he left. I, however, had my tire back. Now, was the madman an angel? Looks like God positioned this madman by the river. Was it a coincidence? Anyway, this shaggy, dirty man was my angel. Now, look at this post from a social media influencer. And perhaps this ties in with what the first presenter, Jackie, was saying about being sensitive to language. So this politician doesn't really mean bad. He wants to show that at least he was helped when he was stranded. He's rich, whatever, but at one moment he couldn't help himself. But there's someone who helped him, who to him he considers as an angel. But the language that he's using is really demeaning. So it's very good for us to have this conversation about language and also how we can engage on social media. Next slide, please. So basically, as reporters or people who are telling stories about disability on social media, we need to remember the news values. I know in any college of media, this is what you're taught. Any story that you're giving out there, ask yourself, what is its news value? Think about the 5 W's plus H. Who, what, where, why, when, and how. And then, apart from having a good story, social media is largely visual, very visual. So think about this story on disability, but then think about an accompanying photo or video or infographic that tells the story at a higher level. Because remember, a picture, for example, is worth 1,000 words. So social media, don't just post just text only. Think visual. And then keep it short. Most people's attention span on social media is limited. So if it's a video, perhaps 4 minutes or less is better. And also short text. And above all, watch your voice. Because as someone who's championing for the rights of persons with disability, we shouldn't tell stories in a way that demean them, degrade them, like in the first post that I shared. So think about your voice. Are you preachy? Are you condemning? Or are you motivating or upgrading your subjects as you speak? Let's move on to the next slide. But above all, in social media, it is, personal stories that sell. People are interested in listening to personal stories. So when you're writing about disability in the media, make it personal, and that will make you really pull a crowd, start a conversation and so on. And then add your voice, even if it's just a post you're sharing. Maybe there's someone who wrote a nice article and you're sharing it. You can add your voice to it. After all, the social media platform is personal. It's your own. So when you make stories, have that human touch, personal, then that's better. And then when you write your stories, because disability is, I would say largely predominantly a new phenomenon, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, the conversations about how to make it right, amplify the voices of persons with disability. So encourage discussions. That is, if you make a post, make it open-ended. Ask people for questions, welcome suggestions, so that they can engage with each other and also they can engage with you. Like in the first post that I mentioned about this politician, I'm glad there's a lot of conversation, and at some point somebody asked about the language. I also added my voice there, so we're able to have a conversation around how to make things better. Next slide, please. Now, on social media, how do you choose your platform? How do you know, let me go to Twitter or Facebook and so on? Now, what will guide you on the choice of the platform is your target audience. Ask yourself, if I want to reach the youth, on which platform are they? If I want to reach perhaps older people, on which platform are they? So you'll find that, for example, more youth are on Instagram, for example. Yeah, and so post their visual content, and make it engaging. If you want people who, are thinking about politics, topical issues, social commentary, then you can go on Twitter. And if you're thinking about a medium that's family oriented, then Facebook would work well. And be on the lookout all the time about which new platform is coming and who is paying attention to that new platform. Like TikTok, mostly the younger generation, 14, 16 years to 22, 25, they're on TikTok. So think about your audience. Where will you find them? And then the other thing you need to do is think about a niche. Like if you are a Twitter person, that's where you feel comfortable, then develop it and make it better. Use stories there and so on, because again, you can't be everywhere and succeed. Next slide, kindly. Now I want to just pick an example about Twitter, perhaps discuss a couple of things about Twitter. And here I've pulled a photo from Jackie's Twitter page, and if you look at Jackie, she's branding herself as a person who's changing the disability narrative in media across Sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at this, anyone who opens this Twitter account can begin to see that this person or this reporter is interested in issues surrounding disability. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And when you post your content, you can post the content across multiple channels. So remember, you're like doing some bit of activism. So you have this story on disability, and you want it to reach a larger audience. Don't just do it on Twitter and stop there. You can post the same content on Twitter, post the same content on LinkedIn, perhaps do the same on Facebook or even Instagram. But the trick here is that although you're posting this content across the platforms, tailor the content to each platform. Like if you're doing Twitter, perhaps Twitter, fewer words, more punchy, catchline, clever. If you go on Facebook, the same content, but now you can tell a brief story because you have the space to do that. On Instagram, if you have a photo that's an action photo that tells the same story, then you can do that. So although you're posting across multiple sites, but then ensure that the content is tailored to these sites. Next slide, kindly. And something else that is important, even if you're not the person who has written this article or made this video, let's try to amplify each other's voices. If you come across a nice post where someone has, written very educative stuff about, that creates awareness about persons with disability. Sorry, let's amplify those voices. Like on Twitter, you can do that by retweeting with a comment. So because when you make a comment, it allows you to tag other relevant organizations like disabled persons organizations. You can also tag other social media influencers in the disability movement. You can also use hashtags, to create awareness about certain topics concerning disability. And I want to pick an example here on Instagram, the next slide. And I really like the work that's being done on Tanzania. Next slide, kindly. Yeah. So I've been following the webinars from Tanzania. I think Ali is doing some good work. I've seen so many stories on disability. So when the next slide comes, we'll see one of the posts on Instagram on a story from Tanzania. So on Instagram, mostly you have action, photos. So choose action photos. Remember, as I said, a photo is worth 1,000 words. And if you're thinking about videos, Instagram allows you to post very short videos for about 15 seconds. So in 50 seconds, you need to think, okay, so how can I tell my story in such a brief, brief span of time? And the other thing that we need to pay attention to, maybe Chris, if you can hear me, you can move to the next slide, kindly. So the other thing we need to do, we need to put captions, which can act as alternative text, even on Instagram, or Facebook or Twitter. Let's, be putting these captions. They could be captions that are descriptive. Maybe they describe, the image, or you can provide alternative text if it's a video for persons with, perhaps hearing disability or those who are blind. Yeah, and that's the story from Tanzania. You can see this is Instagram, and it's an action post. Next slide, kindly. And in the next slide, I really like what Pat is doing, our moderator. So on her Facebook page, she's trying to be inclusive. Like when she posts a video. So there's a picture I pulled up where there's a video, and she's describing the video. So she says, 2 women on a tandem bike speed around a banked track. So if we get to that habit, then we promote what we can call inclusive education, communication. And to my last point, next slide, kindly. It's about Eboyzing and social media. And I know perhaps most of us are guilty of this. You get a nice meme on social media, perhaps on WhatsApp or Twitter, and you just click share. And perhaps this meme really is, demeaning to persons with disability. Some memes have words like "you are crazy," or "that's so lame," or "she's such a psycho." Especially if it's a politically charged environment, I know people like to call other names. Like if you look at the meme on the right, it's about Trump, and I think this was developed at the height of the American elections. And someone says, "speaks at 4th grade, reads at 3rd grade, says at 2nd grade." So here it's like the poking fun, or demeaning persons with learning disabilities. So let's avoid that, because Eboyzing really refers to attitudes in the society that devalue and limit the potential of persons with disabilities. So let's not share these memes because it's not really acceptable to stigmatize persons with disabilities. Thank you very much. I'm glad this conversation is going on, and I believe we'll engage more on social media and even on the chat. Thank you. Thank you very much. Over back to you, Pat.
Thank you so much, Dr. I think we have some time for questions. If you want to either put your question in the chat or raise your hand, and I can call on you. I think I can see raised hands. Does anybody have a question? I'm sorry if I'm not seeing. You could also unmute yourself and ask a question if I'm not able to see your raised hand.
Pat, I have a question for Daris, maybe through Sahar. This is Bea, may I ask?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sahar, maybe if you can ask Daris, how many people belong to the media center that he created in Yemen? And has he seen an improvement in the mainstream media on how they report on about issues that matter to persons with disabilities? Thank you.
Okay. Daris.
مرحبا تفضلي.
تسأل عن الأشخاص اللي يشتغلوا في السنتر، وهل لمست أي فارق من خلال تغطيتك لقضايا ذوي الإعاقة؟ هل لمست أي فارق في حياة هؤلاء الأشخاص أو في الإعلام؟
من خلال تغطية المركز الإعلامي للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، إحنا أولاً فريق المركز الإعلامي أغلبهم هم من الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة أنفسهم، فهم الذين يتحدثون عن قضاياهم وهم الذين يغطون قضاياهم ويدافعون عن حقوقهم ويرسلون أصواتهم. هناك فارق كبير بين تغطية. Okay.
So Daris said that. Okay, Daris said that his team, most of them is disabled, and those people advocate for their rights and fighting to raise their voices. طيب هل لمست أي فارق مثلا أو حصل تغيير في الإعلام؟
طبعا اكيد الاشخاص قضايا الاشخاص ذوي الاعاقه حين يغطيها المركز فانه يغطيها بطريقه حقوقيه، يعني تحاول الالتزام بالتغطيه للقضايا ومناصرتها وفقا للتشريعات والقوانين الصادره والتي تؤكد على احترام الانسان من ذوي الاعاقه. وسائل الاعلام الاخرى المشكلتها انها تغطي القضايا بصورة نمطية تؤكد على الرحمة والشفقة. هذا الذي أريد أن أؤكد عليه.
So he insists that when he covers the stories of disabled people, he do it in he trying to break the stereotype, while the other media trying to show this group of people in pity and to attract mercy, but he tried to do it differently.
هناك فارق هناك فارق كبير ايضا من حيث طرح القضايا، حيث ان وسائل الاعلام العاديه في اليمن تطرحها وتكرس الصوره النمطيه للشخص المعاق الضعيف المغلوب على امره، اما المركز فهو يحاول تغطيه القضايا بكل مهنيه ويعني يحاول الطرح الحقوقي، يعني البعيد عن النظره الشفقه والرحمه.
He says that he's trying to advocate for the rights of those people and to do it in an appropriate way that show the creativity and the ability of those people, a way of the society stereotype of pity and mercy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? Or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question, because I'm not sure if I'm able to see raised hands.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Nadia. Yeah, I think I would like to address this to any of our speakers today. I would like to know more from the community of the people with disabilities, whether how they feel about political correctness in terms of communicating their issues, because whether they feel that maybe sometimes humor can diffuse certain narratives or conversations around this very serious topic. So I'm just wondering whether you know, there's a certain line that they can actually accept when people talk about these issues, or how do they see this kind of political correctness sometimes that we try to observe as well.
Jackie, do you want, or is that something you want to answer?
I can take it, yeah. So the politically correctiveness naming of person with disability actually came out from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. They are actually the ones who came up with the right terminologies that they think they need to be addressed with. So it's not that something that we came up with, it is in the UN Charter. And in the next webinar, we are going to talk more about the treaties, international and local treaties on disability, and you are going to see all these treaties, the naming, the media, the education, everything concerning person with disability. So it is not that it's our own creation, but it came up with the person with disability. But after saying that, remember the golden rule: ask the person with disability what they prefer to be called with, especially when you are doing an interview with them. So don't just use the politically correct name. Let them have their say on what they really prefer. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. And also, I think that sometimes people with disabilities have when they talk amongst themselves, may use different terms that, you know, they feel are okay to use with each other, but not necessarily used by other people. So do you have any other questions? Okay, I think we're actually
Pat, do you want me to share Jackie's results of the survey?
oh, sure, that would be great. And while we're doing that, I'll just remind everybody that we have the third disability reporting workshop will be held on June 17th. And we'll be sending out email reminders where you can check out the Internews Health Journalism Network website. And I want to thank everybody for attending and for our wonderful speakers.
I think that Dennis wants to ask a question. We could let him do that before wrapping up.
Sure.
Hello?
Yes, hello? Go ahead.
Okay, my name's Dennis Juma, famously known as Kaka Juma from Kenya. I'm a journalist by professional. And I just want to raise a question on first, I wish to appreciate those who have presented. Then raise a question: do we have any university or college in the world that do or have the courses concerning the PWDs?
There are, I'm sorry, there are universities in the U.S. that have disability studies programs, which I think probably address reporting and terminology. And there's also a, let me get this right, National Center for Journalism and Disability at the University of Arizona. And that I'm sure that they have classes, but yeah, other than that, I'm not sure about other places. Maybe other people know.
Thank you.
Jackie,
Yeah.
can you see the screen, the shared screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So I cannot really be able to see the results.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. So the answer for the first question was no. Frequently. Yeah. So the second question, the answer, I think not so many people got it. The second answer also was no. To call people without disability normal, we said no, we just call them people without disability, because if you say normal, you mean their rest are abnormal. The third one, it was yes, because it is good to tell someone if you've been together, even if they cannot see you, tell them see you later. It means you can meet another time. So it doesn't necessarily mean see you later, you are diminishing that person. So the answer is yes. And the last answer for the wheelchair, to tell someone with a wheelchair, rush, run, it is okay. Because maybe you have given that person an assignment and you're telling them to rush and to run and to do the assignment quickly. So remember, if they have using the wheelchair, it doesn't mean their brain is disabled or their hands is disabled. It means they can still work and they can still use their brain. So it is okay for you to say rush and run. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I think so again, yeah, we'll have the third reporting workshop on June 17th. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahar and Daris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Prof.